We all know the WWE, right? It's this global entertainment juggernaut. But what if I told you that this whole billion-dollar empire was kicked off by an act of rebellion, a massive power play, and one absolutely spectacular law? All right, so let's get into it. To really get how the WWE started, you have to understand the world it was created to fight against. And trust me, it's a wild story of broken rules, a hijacked championship, and a completely fake tournament that somehow changed everything. So, let's set the scene. Picture it, the early 1960s. There is no WWE. Nope. Instead, the entire world of professional wrestling in North America is run by one all-powerful group. That group was the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA. Now, this wasn't one single company. You got to think of it more like a private club for all the major wrestling bosses from all over the country. They all worked together to control the wrestlers, their territories, and most importantly, the World Heavyweight Champion. In this club, well, it had one golden rule that made the whole system work. The NWA champion had to travel. He was the main event, the guy who guaranteed a sold-out arena. See, when the champ rolled into your town, you made a ton of money, enough to keep your business booming for months. The champion didn't belong to just one guy. He belonged to the entire alliance.
But this perfectly balanced system was about to run headfirst into the one man who would completely break it. A guy who was both a promoter's absolute dream and their worst nightmare. Nature Boy Buddy Rogers.
I mean, look at him. Rogers was the total package. He had the bleach blonde hair, the amazing physique, that signature figure 4 leg lock. The guy was a megastar, and he was incredibly loyal to his main backers up in the Northeast Territory, a promoter named Toots Munt, and a young guy you might have heard of, Vincent J. McMahon, who we now know as Vince McMahon Sr. So on June 30th, 1961, in front of a record-breaking crowd in Chicago, the NWA puts their title on Buddy Rogers. They figured, hey, we can control him. Oh, were they wrong. Almost right away, Rogers and his Northeast backers decided, you know what, our champion isn't going anywhere.
And this was the ultimate act of defiance. Rogers was shattering the NWA's most sacred rule. And by doing that, he was putting the livelihood of every other promoter in the country at risk.
I mean, the whole conflict was actually pretty simple. The entire system was built on the champion being this traveling rock star. By keeping him locked down in the Northeast, McMahon Sr. and Toots Munt were basically turning the NWA's biggest moneymaker into their own private ATM. You can imagine the other promoters were absolutely furious. I mean, they had voted for Rogers, thinking he would come to their towns and make them all rich. But instead, they were getting completely cut off from their single biggest payday of the year. The NWA was basically on the verge of a civil war.
So the NWA board finally realized they'd created a monster that they couldn't control. So they hatched a plan to take their championship back, by force if necessary.
They couldn't just, fire Rogers as champion. They needed someone so tough, so legitimate, so respected that Rogers would have no choice but to lose the belt. So they called in their enforcer, Lou Thez. Thez was an old-school, real-deal shooter. He was the NWA's insurance policy to guarantee they got their property back. And to make absolutely 100% sure Rogers played along, the NWA did something they'd never done before. They forced him to put down a $25,000 deposit on the championship belt itself. Now that is a huge amount of money for 1963, and the deal was he'd only get it back after he lost the title, just like they told him to. Then, the NWA changed all the rules for the match. Instead of a normal best 2 out of 3 falls match, it was going to be a sudden death, 1 fall contest. Why? To make sure it was over quick, with no time for any funny business. So, in Toronto on January 24th, 1963, Lou Thez beats Buddy Rogers in a single fall. The NWA had its title back. Or so they thought. And right here, this is the exact moment that changed wrestling history forever. Because what McMahon Sr. and Toots Munt did next wasn't just another business move, it was literally the founding of an empire. They immediately cried foul. They claimed that since all NWA title matches were supposed to be 2 out of 3 falls, that 1 fall match in Toronto was totally illegitimate. They refused to recognize Thez as champion, broke away from the National Wrestling Alliance, and started their very own company, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or WWWF. So, okay, they've got a new company, and they've still got their guy, Buddy Rogers. There's just one tiny problem, right? He just lost the NWA title. So how on earth could they call him their champion? Well, they needed a story,
A good one, a way to give their new championship instant credibility and make it seem important. So, they just made one up, completely out of thin air. The official story that they told all the fans was that after that controversial loss to Thez, Buddy Rogers went down to Rio de Janeiro. And there, he supposedly entered this huge international tournament, beat everyone, including the legendary Antonino Rocca in the finals, and was crowned the first ever WWF World Heavyweight Champion.
Yeah, about that. The tournament in Rio de Janeiro, it never happened. It was a complete and total fabrication. In April of 1963, they just quietly handed the championship belt to Buddy Rogers and told the whole world he won it. The WWF was born from a lie.
But, an empire needs more than just a rebel king to get it started. It needs a real hero that the people can actually believe in. And the McMahons knew that Rogers, the guy who kicked this all off, wasn't their future.
Get this. Just 1 month after being crowned the winner of that make-believe tournament, Buddy Rogers defended his new title against the WWF's new hand-picked hero, a young powerhouse named Bruno Sammartino. The match was over in a jaw-dropping 48 seconds.
That absolutely dominant 48-second win instantly turned Bruno Sammartino into a megastar. He would hold that championship for nearly 8 years straight. That's 2,803 days. Cementing the WWF as a real force and building the very foundation of the company that would, one day, become the WWE.
So it all comes back to this one single act of defiance. The NWA tried so hard to protect its system and its rules, but in doing that, they accidentally created the very rival that would eventually conquer them. It really makes you wonder, in that fight for power, was the NWA right to enforce its rules, or was McMahon right to rebel and build his own kingdom from a lie?